interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin.
And we're back. This time we're diving into episode 5. It's kind of surprised we're already there. It moved really fast. But season 2, episode 5, this one is titled Halls of Stone. Got Bryce and Caleb back with me to dive into this.
What up, what up? I'm very excited for this.
I'm excited to talk about this one. Bryce, try to contain yourself a little bit there.
You're right.
Make sure we can get a word in edgewise.
Listen, there's only room for one of us to geek out about this episode. And it's not me.
So I was, just to get caught up after last week, after episode 4, I was not sure how I was feeling about everything. And episode 4 was a low spot for me. I think episode 5, I'll get into full thoughts later, but this was a step in the right direction. This was what I needed personally. So we open with a mountain shot that reminded me immediately of the opening of Two Towers.
Straight away.
Yep. But then it quickly transitions into King Durin's ring with its enormous rock. I thought it was kind of a cheesy transition, but I get what they were going for. It's all right. It did just make me think of how ugly the rings are, if I'm honest. Like, they're just very ugly. But he picks it up, and we see that all 7 dwarf rings are finished. So some time has passed since we were talking about it. Time is jumping very quickly, actually, throughout this whole season, but definitely through this episode. As he walks away with it, we hear whispering. Very much like when Frodo would put the ring on in the original trilogy movies. You'd get that.
Some disembodied voices.
Yes. So, honestly, not really a fan of that element, but that's all right. That's not a big deal for me. He goes down to where workers are trying to dig out sunlight, for lack of a better term. King Durin looks around at the rocks and says, all is shortly to be well. And he puts his hand on a rock, the hand that just happens to have a finger on it, and says, dig here. He gets mad at the other Durin for dwarf-splaining that this is a foundation stone and takes an axe and starts to do it himself. During this,
dwarf-splaining.
During this, Durin and Narvi send all of the others home because this is a foundation stone. They are worried this is going to collapse the chamber. So they send all the workers home for fear that the king will bring it down upon their heads. After some time, King Durin looks in the sunlight. We get a nice musical moment by McCreary during this scene. And it's this hopeful moment that is kind of has this undercurrent of dread with it. And I liked the way they did that. But Durin walks around, finds more spots to dig. The mirrors are then positioned to catch the new lights, and Khazad-dûm is relit. But this segment ends with a shot of Disa and her stone singers, and they don't seem too thrilled with this turn of events. So that is the opening of episode 5. I thought it was a little cheesy at first, honestly, but then by the end of it, I was enjoying it. So, not many thoughts from the others on the opening of this one?
Yeah, so this show is called Rings of Power.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first... It's not the first episode where we see actual Rings of Power being used, but we're starting to see it more consistently now. And that's a positive for me. I'm glad that in this show that's called Rings of Power, we now have 10, I mean, really only 4 of them have been used, but we have 10 Rings of Power that exist, 4 of them that are being actively used, at least 3 of them. Círdan hasn't done much with his yet, but
yeah,
we have Rings of Power. They're being used. We're seeing it play out. We're seeing how they're being used, how they're being viewed as a positive thing by those that are wearing them. So, yeah, I think this is good. This is to use your term, a step in the right direction as far as we're getting some content that we were hoping to get. So
I
overall,
like
thumbs up, I say.
I like that you pointed out the title is Rings of Power, and now we're finally getting so that I didn't even think about it that way, but I'm like, oh yeah, we are finally getting to see these in use, and that's part of the excitement.
Yep.
All right, we cut to Celebrimbor giving a speech to the elves and dwarves. There's like 6 elves on one side and 6 dwarves on the other side. It's a really grand affair. But now Narvi is there, so he fast traveled, and they revealed the doors of Durin, which they'd been hinted at. It's kind of exciting. I got the impression, and if you pay close attention, I thought it was kind of cool. They revealed the carving of the doors, but they don't have the, I'm spacing on what it's called, the moon
runes.
Yeah, they don't have the moon runes yet. So the carvings are all there. And then in later shots, you'll see the doors are laid back down, and they're filling them in. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. It was a little detail that at first it looks like they're using the doors as a table, but no, you can see the moon rune stuff being put into. I thought that was kind of cool, honestly.
And they set it up pretty well, because in an earlier episode, Celebrimbor was talking with the one blonde lady that is one of the Smiths of Eregion, and he shows her the moon runes, and she's all like, oh, that's so cool. He's like, yeah, right, it's super cool. And now we're seeing the doors of Durin, and like I thought they did a pretty good job setting that up.
I agree. I thought the doors of Durin were going to be a bigger reveal, but I'm not mad about it. It is one of those things that's just, it happened. It's cool. That elf you mentioned, her name is Murdania. And I think this is the first episode she's actually called by name.
I believe she is. This is the first time she's named.
Yeah, she's been around for a little bit, but now we finally have a name. But he's giving the speech, doors of Durin are revealed, and they look just like they did from the movies, or for those of you who read the books, just like the illustration from the books. So this is one thing that we have been faithful to across all adaptations. It helps when you have a very precise drawing of it.
It's pretty well teed up for you.
Yep. We get some fun dialogue between Narvi and Celebrimbor that I enjoyed. Anatar gets emo and walks outside to stare at the moon and sulk. Celebrimbor follows him and asks if he overdid it. Anatar is like, yeah, you don't listen, you're sleeping on the couch tonight, and he pouts a little bit more. Celebrimbor is sorry he didn't mention Anatar's contributions, and Anatar then leans into guilting Celebrimbor to make rings for men. And then Celebrimbor says one of the lines that I've liked in this show so far, sowing seeds in others' minds and then convincing them it is the fruit of their own thought. It's like that. I liked that. That was pretty good. So he says that's something that Anatar does. Celebrimbor says he will speak of men tomorrow, and Anatar gets pretty firm and says he prefers to speak of them now. During this conversation, Anatar says he fears Numenor more than any other. Celebrimbor says giving rings to men cannot happen because they are too corruptible. Anatar mentions heroic men of the past, 2 who are half-elven, and then
Great lore drop for those of us that are into the deeper stuff. It was really fun when he was like naming off Earendil, Tuor, Beren, son of Badahir. It's like it's a good like subtle nod. If you don't know the lore, you're just like, yeah, okay, those sound like important people. And if you do know the lore, you're like, yeah, those guys.
I know. So during my read of the Silmarillion, one of the standout tales in that was, isn't that where Beren and Luthien is told?
That is one of the tellings of Beren and Luthien, yes.
Yeah. Beren and Luthien need their own movie. Beren and Luthien need an adaptation because that story is fantastic.
It's amazing. And one of the tricky parts of why it would be difficult to turn into a movie is there are several different adaptations of that. So if you read Beren and Luthien, the standalone book, it will go through the various adaptations that it went through. So like originally the story was very, very different. And as the lore was fleshed out, the story that we get in the Silmarillion is kind of like the finished product. And that's the one that makes the most sense amongst all of the other lore, but it's not necessarily the best version of it.
Oh, I get you. Okay.
Depending on who you ask. But yes, that story is absolutely epic.
I feel like you would have to tell the lore correct one, the final
You'd have to,
version.
yeah.
But
for sure.
I totally get what you're saying. But that's one that I read that in the Silmarillion, and that was one of the few stories. There's many stories in that book. That was one of the few that stuck in my brain as just being this huge, epic, fantastic tale. It's so good.
And frankly, they don't have the rights to it, and they probably never will, but they kind of tee it up pretty well with Rings of Power, because a lot of Galadriel's character and drive is focused around the fact that her brother was killed by the forces of Sauron, and that's kind of her whole thing, is like she had to take up her brother's mantle and she won't rest until he's avenged, kind of thing. That story is told in the Tale of Beren and Luthien, of how her brother is like killed like that. So there's a connection there that they've set up a little bit with Galadriel's backstory in this show.
So, side note, go read Beren and Luthien. It's
worth a read.
So it's definitely worth a read if you're a Lord of the Rings fan. So we get those name drops, and Anatar makes up some. This is where the show falters a little bit. This is where I think some of their decisions about making the rings in the order they did have caused issues in the writing. But Anatar makes up some weird reasons why 9 rings are needed, and Celebrimbor's like, nah, that's too much, I'm out. And Anatar is like, all right, I'll make it myself. And here we go. I'm don't have any major problems with it, because at this point we're committed to the order that the rings are made, and they keep trying to kind of science away the way these rings work, and like science and magic and combining them, and that's not working for me. But I'm not as offended by it as I was with Tom Bombadil quoting a chapter from a different book, if that makes sense. So it's like you backed yourself into a corner in season 1 with how you're going to handle these rings, and now you're trying to write it the best you can. So I'll let it go.
I do like the ongoing power struggle between Anatar and Celebrimbor. Like,
I thought this episode did a great job of that.
Yeah, Celebrimbor needs to think that he's in control. Anatar knows that Celebrimbor needs to think that he's in control. So he's just the delicate balance that he's working of, like, Celebrimbor even says, like, I know what you're doing. You're planting ideas in my mind and then making me think they're my own.
Uh-huh.
And he knows that he's doing it, and he's doing it so well, he's still getting away with it. Like, that's pretty cool.
The end of this episode, it doesn't come full circle, but the end of this episode leans into that even harder, and I really like some of that.
Yep.
So we cut to Numenor, where Pharazôn is staring out at his new kingdom with his son. His son reminds him that he is now the leader, and is that not enough? And Pharazôn is like, I thought it would be enough, but I want more. So together, the two, I've been referring to Pharazôn's son because I can't remember the name Kemen for some reason. I called him Nasal Nick because he speaks really nasally. Together, the two are going to make Numenor great again. And then Pharazôn goes, one time when you were breastfeeding, your mom said you'd die real bad, but I'll only tell you this if you do a good job. And I was like, where the heck did this come from? But okay, we move on. That was one of those really, like, trying to be an important line that really just was a weird line at a weird moment. We then go to Muriel and Elendil. They're in the top of a tower, and I don't know how she's in this tower. If they overthrew her, I thought she would be, like, kicked out of the city, but she's still allowed in her same quarters. Muriel asks what Elendil saw when he touched the Palantir 2 whole episodes ago. He responds something very vague, and we get a flashback that doesn't seem super positive, but it's clear Numenor is in the distance behind him. Muriel saw a flood destroying the kingdom last year in season 1. So she thinks Pharazôn coming into power means that Numenor is going to survive. So she commands Elendil to let Pharazôn take the throne and not stage a coup or form any kind of resistance. She straight up says, that is my command to you. Follow him, basically. So we cut to a scene in a small alley where anyone deemed loyal to the queen is turning in their items as they have been stripped of rank. There's like 10 people there. This is one of my complaints with the show. With as big of a budget as it is, they can only afford 30 extras at any given time. That is, there's never more than like 30 people in a room, and that's one of my frustrations. So like all of the people who were deemed loyal to the queen are lined up, and there's 10 of them in a line, and it's just this big moment that feels small. So
you feel like they should be in like the city square, and it feels like they're in an alley, like jutting off of the city square.
This happened season 1 when Pharazôn would be given his speeches to the men, and they were gathered in like some corner off in the distance. And I'm like, wouldn't this be in the city square, like at the gates of the palace, rallying up hundreds? And instead you've got 15 people ready to go. Yeah, that is, these big things feel really small, and I don't understand why a show with this budget can't afford to just build a bigger set and pump 100 people in there. I don't get that. Money should be spent better. Anyways. So Elendil asks on whose authority the rank is being stripped, and it turns out it's his daughter's, of course. She just pops out, oh, it's me. And then Elendil cuts in line, turns in his sword. Someone says it's Valandil. It took me a while to remember his name. Valandil says, Captain leaving deck, in honor, and the loyal stand to attention. I thought that was a pretty cool scene. Nasal Nick, Pharazôn's son, says he's nobody's captain now, and we get this little bit of power play like, hey, I'm in power, he's not. Elendil turns around and says, he pauses, and I think we're about to get something really cool and like not devastating physically, but at least like a really devastating line, insult, something. And he's right, I'm not. And then he starts to walk away. And then we do get the soldiers who begin to thank Elendil and show their loyalty. And we see that maybe this division between those loyal to the queen and Elendil is bigger than we realize. It's not just a couple people. There are those who are still willing to follow Elendil and what he represents. And so we're starting to see this division. So I hate how this season has addressed all of Numenor so far. And then we get to this and I'm like, oh, things are getting interesting. We're getting this little bit of a civil war developing here. And I know where this is headed. I like this, but it felt very poorly fleshed out based on the previous episode. There could have been a lot better build up to this, but I'm liking where we're at now.
See, I feel like this is the build up. Like, I feel like this is they're setting the stage for something bigger to happen later.
Okay. It still just rubbed me wrong how weird the previous episode dealt with Numenor. How quickly everything...
We definitely all agreed that episode 3 like just rushed to the finish line.
It was like
there was a super big moment that happened, and we got there in like 7 minutes of screen time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Agreed.
So then we cut to Pharazôn walking up to the Palantir, and that's the last we see of him for this episode. That was it. We cut to the king, Elven King, reading. I spaced on his name.
Gil-galad,
yeah. He's reading a letter from Celebrimbor saying that the forge is closed while we clearly see the forge is in action. Then we cut to a scene of Elrond running very quickly through the woods, and it was something silly, but like this short scene of him running at full speed through the woods is intense. And he sheds his cloak. And initially I'm like, is this like when you're a kid and you're like, oh, I got new shoes, look, I can run faster? He's like, oh, I shed my cloak so I can run faster. I'm like, I believe a cloak would slow you down. Yes, I get that. But also, is that cloak, this was one of those things where dropping the leaves of Lorien in the Two Towers for when Merry and Pippin pulled the pin and dropped it in the mud so that they could find him. I'm like, is this something where he will be found later based on this cloak? But then he just arrives later and he's fine. So I'm like, no, that's not it. So we see Elrond running. Then we cut to Durin and Disa. Apparently, Disa is the only one who has a bad feeling about the dwarf rings. They go shopping and we discover the king is a socialist taxing his people at 50%. Doubling the prices of everything, Disa buys a tuning crystal and immediately drops it. The ball rolls in what is supposed to be, I could only interpret this as comedy. It's supposed to be a comedic manner through this shopping thing, down a pair of stairs that's literally right there, but no one has gone down in centuries. It rolls all the way to the edge of an underground lake. Disa sees the lake, goes, what is this? And decides it's the perfect place to vocalize for a second. Then she sees a tuning crystal, and in response to her song, we hear a low grumble that causes the water to move. She drops this crystal that had apparently been softened by its long fall and roll down to this place because this time it actually breaks. And it's a dramatic cut. I don't mind what happened here. It felt clumsy getting to this thing underwater. Is it a thing underwater or is it something deeper in the cavern?
That is the question. Is it a creature in the water, or is it something further away that's like reverberating through the mountain?
Yeah, because we got the Balrog tease in season 1,
right?
but this would be the first reference to the creature in the water. So
the Watcher.
Yeah, I actually really liked the little tease. I was fine with that because it's super vague. I don't know what it is, and so I'm curious. I liked the ambiguity here.
Same. I liked where we got. I, similar to you, did not love how we get there. It seemed a little clunky. Yeah.
Then we see King Durin talking to emissaries of the other dwarven realms. He is presenting the rings to the dwarves to tell them it's going to cost them. We see that he is suddenly very greedy. We cut to him and Narvi looking at a map, and the king is stating that there is gold. They just need to dig deeper. You should be picking up on the signs of where this is going at this point. Then the king has a very Bilbo moment of losing his ring. And Narvi says, your arm was feeling heavy. You took it off. And the king does exactly what Bilbo does when he's, oh, it's here in my pocket. And he's just this very... I had a problem with this scene.
I'm discovering that Tim's biggest problems with this show are frequently references to the movies.
Yes. Yeah, actually.
I don't like this because I saw this in a movie, and that's why I don't like it.
Well, also, I was never under the impression that any of the other rings, they were supposed to be rings of power, but I did not get the impression that they would act upon the wearer like the One Ring did. The One Ring, this is taking away some of that uniqueness of the One Ring. From the whispers that we hear to it growing heavy and light. He says it grows heavy. He takes it off. He's being absent-minded about it. So at this point is the only difference between the One Ring and these rings, the ability to, like, for Sauron to see it. Like, where is that line going to be? Because I feel like they're blurring it, and that's my problem with that. That's my problem with... I thought they were just supposed to be rings of power that were viewed as great gifts, and then later, like, oh, they're a problem. So, and not all of them. Well, yeah. So that's where I'm... The gray line for me is... I didn't hate it. It worries me. I don't know where it's going. It's not something that would break the show for me.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and do a little more research. I think you're correct in that. I think the I think in the lore, the rings of power are all like just good until Sauron makes the one and puts the one on, and that's when he starts controlling and manipulating the others and drawing the others to his power. So I think I think you have a very legitimate beef there.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I just think it's minimizing the one at this point, and that's my main problem with it. Also, weren't the Dwarven rings supposed to be passed down for generations? Because in The Hobbit, one of them is still wearing it. Is he not?
No, there are no. By the time the Hobbit comes around, there are no more rings of power. They've all either been destroyed or reclaimed by Sauron at that point.
Okay, that's my misunderstanding. So
Thorin is wearing a like an heirloom ring in the Hobbit, but it's not one of the rings of power. It's just a ring from the line of Durin.
Okay, gotcha. So then Durin breaks in and says, breaks into the room where King Durin is talking about digging deeper. Prince Durin, who's not a prince, but the Durins get confusing when retelling, breaks in to the very room and says, Disa heard something under the mines, and she knows this is one of the problems in the writing. She just inherently knows it's a nameless evil that's ancient and powerful. Not that it could be something else under there making noise. But he begs Durin, don't dig, and Durin says to Narvi, you have your orders, dig. And Prince Durin begs, please don't. King Durin says that with his ring, he can see the entire mountain, and basically Disa's dumb stone singing is ancient technology. And that's that scene. I like where it's going. We cut to Celebrimbor.
Dragon sickness is one of the things that is specifically listed as one of the downfalls of the dwarves, and as it pertains to the rings of power, like, and dragon sickness being defined as like a lust for gold and jewels and gems and riches and all that. So, like, again, to what you said earlier, it probably shouldn't be happening already. That probably should be something that comes later on down the line after the one ring is forged and subsequently wielded by Sauron. But like, they're pushing the timeline a little bit, but it makes sense that Durin is all of a sudden like, I want all of the riches and treasures in the world.
I think at this point, I mean, I said at the beginning, time is passing very fast, because I think from the time it opened and Durin first puts on the ring to now, after he's met with 7 other kingdoms, like, we're probably weeks or months.
Right. Time has passed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, Elrond hasn't been running for several months, so like, right. It can't be necessarily the exact same timeline, because that doesn't work out. Yeah.
We're moving on probably 3 separate timelines, because Celebrimbor and Annatar would be moving exceedingly slow. We cut to Celebrimbor, and he hears an elf woman cry out. This is Merdania, whatever. He descends to the workroom floor where we get some Invisible Man action. For some reason, Merdania plays with items around the workshop in a progressively dangerous manner while she's invisible, until Celebrimbor manages to pull the ring off of her invisible hand. So I didn't think it was very poorly done. I just kind of was like, each thing she picks up or messes with while invisible is progressively more dangerous. And that's one of those, it was just kind of like cheesy for that situation to be like, oh, at first it's pliers, and then it's a hammer, and then it's fire, and then it's an anvil, and it's like, okay. She says she was in a place shrouded by mist and saw a figure made of flames, and it scared her. She thinks this figure has been in the forge all along. Celebrimbor asks what Annatar did differently with this ring, and Merdania says that they added mithril to prevent the corruption of men. And this is one of those like science-y magic things that they don't explain how that happens. It's just what they did. Soldiers come in telling Celebrimbor that Prince Durin has arrived with urgent information about the Dwarven rings. Celebrimbor says he's too busy, and then Anatar is quick to be like, oh, I'll go. I'll find out what his problem is. And then Celebrimbor seems suspicious of that and says, no, I'll go talk to him. I thought this was one of those nice little power. Initially, Celebrimbor is like, I don't have time. And then when he sees Anatar's interest, we get that little power play of he's suspicious of something. And I like that a little bit. Durin comes in telling Celebrimbor that other Durin is closer to anger and greedier than he's ever been. Durin thinks the ring has changed his father. Celebrimbor says it's not possible. The rings are faultless. I kind of liked this. The rings are faultless. And Durin says maybe it's the fault of the ring maker. I thought that was pretty good. Durin asks how much he really knows of Anatar. And at that moment, I wanted to know how Durin knows who Anatar is. But then I guess since Narvi has been working on the doors, he would have heard about... And he was there. He went there in episode 2, didn't he?
Yes. He and Disa went, and they very, very briefly met him, and he was suspicious of him immediately. Yeah.
So I retract my suspicion of that statement because I remember it as I read that. Merdania and Anatar are inside talking during this, and Anatar says that she saw the real world when she put on the ring. And the flaming human, whatever, was Celebrimbor, and that the process of making these rings has damaged him. Merdania is kind of startled by this news, and he asks, keep it a secret, this is just between us, and then he's like, oh, you look beautiful, just like Galadriel, and then we cut. So a little bit more manipulation there. We cut to Numenor. We are having some kind of ceremony for loss of the people in the battle from season 1. We get a brief quote of this brief quote of a far green country under a swift sunrise. And at this point, every great line Gandalf ever had was not an original idea of his, and he was just copying people from the Second Age. The shrine is disturbed by Nasal Nick, and he says, get the heck out. We're putting a new aqueduct here this very second, so you need to leave. Then he says Elendil's daughter is ashamed of him, and an old man tries to preserve an ancient relic, and Nasal Nick breaks it intentionally. Elendil socks him in the face in what's one of the most rewarding moments of the show so far. And guards, I laughed. He punches him in the face, and the guards put their hands on their swords, but then don't move. You suck as guards.
You're doing a bad job of guarding.
Doing a very bad job. They don't draw their swords or even move until Kemen has told them to hold Elendil. Valandil has had enough and starts to fight Kemen. And somehow Kemen gets the upper hand and starts drowning Valandil in an overly dramatic scene. My only problem with this was how easily Valandil escapes. He's holding him under the water.
I had a problem with the fact that he was in that position in the first place. Like I said to Katie as we were watching it, I do not believe for 1 second that Kemen would physically overpower Valandil. No, that doesn't work for me. Like Valandil is a lieutenant in the king/queen's army, and Kemen is a squirrely little politician's son. Like there's absolutely no way he would physically get the upper hand in that combat at all.
I agree completely. And then I was willing to forgive maybe Kemen knew some trick, got him down. But then the way they handled just that whole initial setup is handled poorly. So between the fact that Valandil is a lieutenant, like you said, and then the way he escapes from being under Kemen is to just push him off. He literally just pushes. He sits there and lets his head be held underwater for seconds, a scene that drags on, and then his escape is, get off me. And then...
His escape is essentially...
Yes, that whole section handled very poorly. But then we get Valandil stand up and give it to Kemen, and I was loving that. So Valandil gets him down and breaks his shoulder or arm, breaks something. It's a nasty crunch. And I was cheering. It was great.
Yep, same.
And then Valandil pushes him off, grabs his sword, holds it to Kemen's throat, and Elendil tells him to drop it. After a second, Valandil does, and then turns around with his hands up and says, "Yes, Captain." And then Nasal Nick stabs Valandil in the back. And one of the better made-up characters in the series is now dead. And one of the worst made-up characters in the series is suddenly more interesting. So the scene worked for me. I obviously had issues with some of the execution in it, but I'm liking seeing Kemen become more of a villain instead of just this whiny brat following his dad everywhere. I liked seeing him go to these lengths of killing a character I actually liked. So I was upset that Valandil was dead because he's one of the made-up ones I liked. So this scene worked for me.
That was maybe the most upsetting death so far. Like, I was more upset by Valandil's death than I was like Bronwyn's death.
Yeah.
And we saw, frankly, more Bronwyn than we saw Valandil, I think. But yeah, it was more impactful for me, I think.
He's definitely been underutilized. And I would be interested to see if I'm remembering correctly from season 1, Valandil was good friends with Isildur.
Yes.
So when they finally meet up, this could have some good ramifications if the writers aren't smart enough to remember what they wrote a couple episodes ago. So
there's honestly, like, anybody in that family could seek vengeance because there was the moment earlier when the troops were handing in their swords and everything, when Aarion, Elendil's daughter, was like, "Hey, I can get you in, like, I can make it so that you keep your post.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
You're one of my oldest friends." Well, now Kemen has killed one of her oldest friends, and so, like, it could be an Aarion v. Kemen thing. It could be Elendil v. Kemen, because obviously he was there, or it could be a Isildur v. Kemen. Like, that entire family has a reason to hate Kemen now.
I actually think that scene is what led to this scene.
Yeah.
Because they have this drawn out when she goes to Valandil and was like, I can talk to the king. I can get you repositioned, whatever. And she is touching him. And Kemen is really insecure, and he's watching that. And it's one of the better, like, subtle scenes that they've done, because you can tell he's very much does not like Valandil, period. So I think these are directly related to why he's now dead. I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Like I said, Valandil is one of the better characters that was made up. Now he's gone, and all of a sudden I care about what's going on with Kemen. I want to see where this is going, because he is now a villain that I am rooting for anybody to take out.
I'm invested in his storyline now.
Yep. Elendil holds Valandil. Just too much of that. As he dies.
I just died in your arms tonight.
Yep. But this is one of the first moments, as we've been discussing, that I'm kind of feeling the gravity of what is going on in Numenor. This is like, it's life or death stakes for some of these people. And I'm more invested. We get to Celebrimbor, who is telling Annatar about the messed up dwarven rings. Celebrimbor asks if Annatar altered the rings, and Annatar is like, no. And then he pauses for a good 5 minutes and then says, we did. It wasn't me, it was us. And this is one of those magic-y, science-y things that he says the fact that they lied about the forge being closed and continued to work means the rings were forged with deceit in them. So they're messed up. And Anatar is like, you gotta go. You gotta get out of here. You gotta go to your king and confess. Or we could just keep going and make things worse. That's essentially how that conversation plays out. And I don't like trying to explain how some things are happening and trying to make it make sense for us.
I did not view it that way. I saw it as Anatar is continuing to lie and manipulate Celebrimbor, because Anatar corrupted the rings. Like, he kind of did this thing when he dropped the Mithril in. Like, he definitely was corrupting the materials when they were making them, but he can't tell Celebrimbor that. In order to get Celebrimbor to like continue to make the rings for men, he's like, oh yeah, you screwed it up, you lied, and now everything's ruined and it's all your fault, and like, I guess you're gonna have to make it better by making more rings. That's the only way it can happen. So I didn't see it as like them magicking away we're doing it like this. I viewed it as Anatar is continuing his deceit and manipulation of Celebrimbor to achieve the ends that he wants to achieve.
I can buy that. I can see that. This is one there where I'm like, really, Celebrimbor? You didn't get like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Deceit. Like, how often has what he's doing in his personal life affected his forgings? But that makes sense. Where did I lose? Okay. So then we cut to Durin convincing his father, Durin, to stop using the ring. Durin says his son's desire to partner with the elves has saved their kingdom and that he's proud of him. And this is a major 180 from where we started the season. He hands back Durin's princely collar, which was just chilling on his desk where he took it off last season. We cut to Disa, who wants to know what went on during this Durin conversation, and she sees the collar. There is this scene with very few words has a heavy sense of dread, and I liked it. I liked it. Disa makes him swear that he will never wear one of those rings, and Durin holds her face and says, I swear it. We cut to Celebrimbor lecturing his smiths on their failure. And this scene is very good cop, bad cop. Celebrimbor being bad cop, lecturing his smiths on failure, and they're like, we did it perfect. And he says, you were bored. You must atone, and by making 9 more rings from humans. They will bring balance to the entire project, strength from the 3, and somehow redeem the 7 of the dwarves. And they will redeem us all. And this is... that to me, like, that explaining stuff, I don't quite follow that, but I'm fine. I can get past it. Then good cop Anatar comes in and tells them not to be discouraged. He paints Celebrimbor as a bad guy, but says it very gently to the others about how important this work is. And we see Celebrimbor go upstairs, and he holds his head in his hands and is trembling. And I just got this sense that Celebrimbor is afraid. Like, he doesn't really know where this is going and what's about to happen, and that things are maybe out of his control at this point. And
that is what made me okay with the thing where when he was addressing everyone and he was like, yeah, you guys messed this up and you did bad, and now we're going to make these new ones and it's going to redeem the whole project and we're going to save Middle Earth and all this. And then he immediately walks upstairs and is like, what is happening? What have I done? Like, we're watching him come unhinged a little bit.
Is one of
I dig it. I really like how that has been done so far.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite moments in this, because it's a very human, kind of relatable, like, what have I done moment that Celebrimbor is, to this season, to this point, he's kind of painted as very high and mighty for the right reasons, not pompous. He is a celebrated elf for a reason. And now we're kind of seeing him crack, and I like it.
Mm.
The camera pans out the window to the woods outside of the city, and we see a line of orcs marching through the trees towards Eregion. There's only, again, like 30 orcs, so the siege is going to be quick. Elrond approaches the High King, and a legion of orcs are headed to Eregion. Is what he says. The High King is like, no, I'm pretty sure Sauron orchestrated all this, so I'm just going to sit back and watch. And he says, our armies cannot defeat Sauron and Adar. And my only issue with this is Sauron's what?
Yeah, they just got done in like a couple episodes ago. I think it was Gil-galad that was like, Sauron doesn't have any allies currently. Like, if Adar is the father of all of the orcs, like, Adar has control of all of the orcs, so I understand why he's your primary concern. Like, you haven't seen any evidence that Sauron has an army of any kind. Like, I don't get why you're like, oh, we can't take out both of these guys. Well, why not though?
This is what I mean by, as long as the writers can remember that Isildur and Valinor were friends, they can write a really interesting moment later, because they forgot, like right here, they tried to make this dramatic reason to call in for aid. Like, we know this is where they're going. They're going to either unite with the dwarves, most likely, to help Eregion. And this is their reason for doing that. But like you said just a couple episodes ago, they acknowledge that Sauron has no allies. So if the writers can keep this in mind, they can get somewhere with that Kemen storyline. But we see the orcs with Galadriel in a cage. They quite easily pop open her door with a stick, which makes me wonder why she didn't do it herself, honestly. And she falls, she gets out, an orc touches her, and then Adar shows up. She pulls a hairpin knife out and holds it to Adar's neck. And Adar basically ends the episode by saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Let's get Sauron together. And that's it. I want to, Bryce, did this episode do anything for you?
Well, I'm here. I'm alive. I would say this episode was probably, the best way I can describe it, is the most inoffensive episode I've seen this season so far.
I love that Bryce has such a healthy attitude about the show.
I'm sorry, I'm loving it. Most inoffensive.
I took the least amount of notes I've ever taken for this season so far of all the episodes. So I would say that's a good sign more than anything. I will point out there were 3 storylines that were never brought up in this episode, and that probably added to some of the tolerance I had for this episode as well. Just going to throw it out there. 3 of my least favorite storylines were not in this episode at all, which is probably why I felt a little bit more engaged watching this. Just going to point that out.
I actually had a similar thought to you. I was like, I think one of the reasons I enjoyed this episode so much was there was a lot of Celebrimbor and Anatar.
Yep.
There was a lot of like Númenorian people, Elendil and Valandil and all them. And I didn't have to see a single Harfoot, and I didn't have to see a single Istari, and I didn't have to see Arondir, and like this was all just fine.
It was kind of nice, actually. It was a good break.
Any of them whatsoever.
That's what it is more than anything. I'm like, I'm glad that none of them were here, because it gave more time for these storylines that I have been more invested in.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I'll start with some of the positive stuff. I agree that, again, Sauron's storyline is about the only storyline that I'm really invested in. It was nice to actually see that one get a lot of time put into it. Now, the downside to that is because the show has a lot of bad writing in it, kind of like what you guys are saying. There's like some hiccups in it now. You're starting to see some of those holes. and just moments that are like, okay, well, I guess I'll just take that on the chin and keep moving on. Nothing super bad that stood out to me. But again,
Bryce, I don't know what you're talking about. The showrunners compared this to Breaking Bad, okay? Celebrimbor's fall from grace was the same as Breaking Bad.
Yes, the same as Breaking Bad.
It's just as good.
Just as good. Again, another positive. I like seeing Sauron's manipulation tactics played out in real time. I like watching that happen. Again, I don't love some of the reasoning behind it. Some of it's kind of goofy, and it's like, okay, whatever. This is the only thing I'm enjoying so far, so I'm just going to let it slide. But it's fun. I do like him and Celebrimbor. I do like their chemistry together. I think they work really well on screen for the most part when it's just those two talking to each other. That was probably the best part of this episode, easily.
There's a whole social media group of people online rooting for the two of them to start a relationship together.
Of course there is.
They're trying to shit Celebrimbor and Anatar.
Anything's possible.
Of course they are.
Tell me you love toxic relationships without telling me you love
the other part I did like was I did like it as well, was the little growls, the little foreshadowing there. We just got a new sound system for our living room, and so we actually have a subwoofer this time. So hearing that during this episode was kind of, oh, that was a nice little surprise. Mm-hmm. But I like how it wasn't just this thing that happened randomly, and it actually plays into some of the story at the end there, which kind of forwards that plot a little bit more. So it didn't feel like just this, oh, you remember the growls from the first movie? I remember. It actually felt a little worth it. So that was kind of nice. What else did I write down here? I think that was really about it. The one thing that really stood out to me, the one negative thing that I can say that really bugged me, some of the edits and cuts they were doing were kind of weird. Who was it specifically? It was Elf King. What's his name?
Gil-galad.
That moment where the ring is kind of foreshadowing Sauron, and all the death and stuff. That edit was kind of weird and felt a little out of place and just kind of looked rough.
Okay, you brought it up. Did it reminded me of Peter Jackson was guilty of it too. He had those weird scenes with the Uruk-hai where it was super grainy and motion blur and all that stuff on him, and I was like, that was a weird choice.
Yeah, and I don't hate the idea of it at all.
I wondered if that's what they were going for, that same similar feel.
Yeah, exactly. I don't dislike the idea.
Least about.
I think the imagery could have looked better. I just think it was poor execution at the end of the day. I kind of like those blurry shots of Sauron in the background with his helmet and stuff. I thought it did look nice. It just probably was executed a little poorly, and just some of those cuts and edits were a little weird. Same thing happened kind of just throughout the episode. When the episode first started, I thought I'd missed an episode because of what you were saying before. There must have been a time lapse between this and the last episode, because I started the beginning. I was like, did I miss something? I do not remember. I feel like I missed something there. This episode kind of felt a little rushed all together. They were trying to fit a lot in, but it also in the same way kind of felt like this restart almost. Hey, this doesn't feel like any of the first few episodes do. And this kind of feels like a new chapter in this season, because it just, for some reason, again, maybe it's just that we didn't get to see all these storylines that we don't like, but it just kind of felt fresher. And they almost had a reset as a creative team. Maybe I'm the only one.
I really agree with what you said. It kind of felt like a restart. So I don't know. And I don't know what it is about that.
Season 1 was similar. We referenced it in the last episode that we recorded, but the first half of season 1 felt very different than the second half of season 1. And you could feel it in how things were shot and how things unfolded and everything. And it seems like season 2 is going to follow a similar trajectory, where I think the back half of the season is just going to have a different feel than the first half of the season.
The back half is looking, from the little trailer that happens after the credits. Yeah, I did watch it on my second watch because I was curious. The second half of the season is looking like it could be I don't want to say really good, but looking like it could be some entertaining watch for sure.
Look, guys, I don't claim to have the gift of prophecy, but maybe at the end of episode 4, you guys were both very down in the dumps on this show, and I was like, I think based on what I have seen that we could have a really, really cool back half of season 2, and episode 5 started to kick that off for me.
We're going to see if this comes into any effect at all. So far, none of what happened to Galadriel and Elrond in episode 4 had any impact other than Galadriel being kidnapped by orcs in the last 5 minutes of that episode. None of it had any impact on what happened to them in this episode. So, and we'll see what that does with the rest of it. At this point, I'm feeling like 4 was pure filler of stuff for like, it was member berries and filler. Like, oh yeah, you remember Ents and you remember...
It was Ents, it was Tom Bombadil, it was Barrow White. It was basically just a fan service episode.
It was. And that was my frustration with it because I didn't feel like we progressed. This episode, I feel like we are moving. Like, we've got the story. We are moving forward with these elements. I love that I'm not pulling lines from Fellowship of the Ring. Personally, I love that wasn't there. And I don't mind repurposing lines from some of the writing. The last episode was just really bad at it. It was really cringy moments. But I know that very few writers today, like maybe 0.5% of the writers in existence today, could write dialogue that is Tolkien worthy. So I'm willing to forgive that. I'm willing to look past that. What bothers me is taking Tolkien dialogue and putting it in fan service moments because it's pandering. It
feels forced, yeah.
Yes, and that was my problem with the last one. And that's where this episode I was willing to be a little bit more forgiving of. Even Elendil it's kind of a cheesy line, but I gave him credit for trying their own when he confronts his daughter. And he says something about her. I didn't write it down. Basically something about her walking on seawater or something, and it's a short way.
The salt water.
The salt water, yeah. And I was like, it's not Tolkien level, but you didn't copy it from another book, and it's honestly not the worst line I've ever heard. It's not bad.
So it's reminiscent of Tolkien's style of writing without being a copy and paste.
Yes. And
it wasn't bad.
I'm willing to forgive those moments. And that's where I think this episode improves. This is where, and to what Bryce said, we didn't have any of what I referred to in the previous episode, and Caleb came after me. The fan fiction. We didn't have the made up, what if Nori gets in a tornado? Like, we didn't have that. We have histories that Tolkien wrote that they are using to flesh out a script. And that is where I'm like, okay, that's why this feels better to me. I still think the writing is garbage. I still think these writers should be fired. Like, these writers are not good. I'm just going to say, I'll give them credit when they get close, but like, good Lord. So I will always love Tolkien's work more than George R.R. Martin's. I'm going to say that right now. But House of the Dragon is based on a very, George R.R. Martin kind of did his own Silmarillion, and that's what the House of the Dragon seasons are based on. But the writing is so sharp. Like, why can't we get those writers for a show like this? It's what it deserves. You get that sharp writing, you get that in there, and you're going to convert the Tolkien fan base because, let's be honest, the Tolkien fan base was hesitant when Peter Jackson announced the movies were coming. It's something that was always thought unfilmable. today there are still people who do not like the Peter Jackson films.
Yep.
But for the most part, the Tolkien fan base is willing to accept them because they're faithful. They're not 100%, they're not accurate, but they kept...
My father-in-law will die on the hill that there were no elves at Helm's Deep, and the fact that there were in the movie is an abomination.
It was for my mother, too. And my mother was also very upset that the Ents did not show up with Gandalf at the Battle of Helm's Deep. Because that was always her favorite part of the book. And that the cavalry... I'm like, yeah, but the extended edition doesn't do it justice, but they're there.
Right.
But because Peter was faithful, the majority of Tolkien fans still come to those movies. They're a quick...
And embrace them.
What?
And they embrace the movies.
Yes. It's a quick and it's acceptable bite of Tolkien world that takes, it takes 12 plus hours to watch them all, but that's less than reading them all. So people, they're a little bit easier to indulge in. So I think if we had better writers to handle this show, I wouldn't be as upset with some of the things that are happening, or any of the things that are happening, if it had been written better. I'm not opposed to changing the order of the rings being made for the sake of television. Write it better. I'm not opposed to Galadriel having a completely different personality than how we know her. Write it better. Though that's where I'm at on this. I'm still enjoying after episode 4, I was looking forward to episode 5. After episode 5, I am eagerly looking forward to episode 6. I want to know where
you texted Bryce and I as soon as you finished episode 5, and you were like, I need 6 now.
I did. I was on, I want to know where this is going. And honestly, my biggest fear about 6, 7, and 8 is I don't give a rat's ass about Nori and Poppy and whatever's going on over there. Tell me what's going on with this story. So
I think we are all on the same page that there are multiple storylines that we're just going to be mad when they come on the screen, because we're going to be like, this is really just taking away.
Yep.
This is taking screen time away from these other stories that you could be spending even more time fleshing out, and you don't have to move so quickly. You don't have to blow through the entire takeover of Numenor by Pharazôn if you're not spending all this time on a couple of Harfoots and an Astari wandering through Rune, and if you're not focusing on Arondir and Theo running around in Pelargir, that's probably going to be a thing for the rest of the season for all of us.
Yep. I completely agree with that statement. And I think the show would be vastly improved. And this goes on the writers for doing too many storylines. Trim it, focus on 3. I mean, I think it blows my mind right now that I'm saying focus on 3 storylines for a TV show instead of 6.
And it's we don't really need Harfoots. We definitely don't need Theo. We don't need Arondir. These are just characters that we've added for another storyline. Give me a Isildur, because he's an iconic character in all of the Legendarium. Give me Elendil, the Numenorian thing. I'll take the dwarves, the Khazad-dûm stuff. That's fine. And then the elves, the Elrond, Galadriel, Celebrimbor, Anatar. Give me that stuff. I don't need any of this other stuff.
Nope. I will say, you brought it up. I am looking forward to, so where I see this going is Isildur, Arondir, Theo are headed to Eregion. So whether that was explicitly said or not, I can't remember. But I've got the impression they're headed to Eregion. So now Elrond, Galadriel are headed to Eregion to defend this battle. We're all going to end up in Eregion at the end of this season. And so I'm finally hoping that means I might like Arondir more if he's actually involved in the main storyline. You know, if we all connect and he's involved with Isildur and Elendil and Elrond, and like, there we go. Okay. And I kind of see that's where this is headed. I think everybody, with the exception of Nori and Poppy and that crap, they're not going to end up at Eregion.
I don't suppose.
No. And it's in the air if Durin shows up at Eregion. It's going to be if the elves call in help from the dwarves.
Right.
Outside of that, the dwarves and the Harfoots, I see everybody ending up in Eregion, and then those storylines coming together. And it just took 2 seasons too long to get there, where we've combined some of these superfluous characters with important characters. So I also, during this episode, realized that everybody who's made up is totally on the chopping block for death. And I'm fine with that. Valandil can die, Theo can die. Not I'm rooting for their death, but there are names you can't kill because of lore.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm realizing, like, oh, all these made-up characters are like the red shirts in Star Trek or the sex-crazed teenagers in a slasher. Like, they're going to die. They're made up. They're not important to the main storyline. So
they don't have to die, but they also don't have to not die either. So I'm in a much better position with my feelings for this show after this. I generally don't know where we're going with it, but like I said, I think we're all going to end up in Eregion. I think some of those storylines that I've hated are going to meet with the storylines I've liked, and then we'll kind of even that out. And hopefully it's not 6 storylines. It whittles down to still too many. But I don't see Poppy and Nori going away anytime soon, as much as I am rooting for it. Yeah.
Which is a shame. I like them. I'm just not like...
No, you don't.
You don't matter.
Lie.
Well, and on the one hand, like, I guess best case scenario is that storyline just gets better and like we start caring about those characters. I don't know what at this point can be done to get me to that point, though.
Yeah, that's because nothing, like, in the histories, you're the expert for the show. In the histories, what was said about the East? East, West?
Yeah, it's the East.
So,
not much. Yeah. I mean, there's these 2 Istari might end up being the Blue Wizards. It's kind of fun to see an explanation of what happened to them, because that's not ever really fleshed out fully in the lore. Tolkien changed his mind a couple times about those 2. So, like, part of it is like, we get an explanation of what may have happened to them. That's kind of fun. But they kind of tipped their hand as to what they're going to do with the Harfoots. It kind of sounds like that storyline is going to end with them finding the Shire, whether it's like they're leading an expedition there or if they're just wandering and they eventually find it and they're like, oh, we have to bring the others here. Or they tipped their hand that is going to be where that storyline goes. And that's not really something that I care to see is the problem.
No, I'm glad you said it, cool. I like that idea. I'm glad we got it. Now we can end that storyline knowing where it's going.
And we're all going to be like, if and when it does happen, they're going to roll up into the Shire and we're going to be the Leo meme. We're going to be like,
yep.
Hey, it's the Shire. Hey, I know that place. Oh, that's kind of cool. It's the first look of the Shire. How about that? And that's going to be like the start and the end of the level of enjoyment for any of us, I think.
And how much danger and excitement can they fabricate along the way? Because at this point, the important story is not theirs. You know, that's just the reality of it. It's there for the Hobbit lovers in the Tolkien world. But even then, I think those people are tuned out because it's do I love Frodo and Bilbo and the Shire and just all that community? Yes. Do I care
Here's the
about this?
downside.
Not a bit.
Here's the downside we're running into with this show. That like as much as this episode was better than the rest, it's starting to look like a bad formula that's going to eventually kill this show, because they're supposed to do 5 seasons. But this episode, again, for me, it felt rushed. It felt like to your point, Caleb, it's nice to see Rings of Power in a show that is called Rings of Power. Like, it's a nice little touch they've added into that. Very good plot point. But again, this episode felt rushed, but we're seeing a pattern of where the first half of a season feels so disconnected from the second half of a season, to where you hit that point, you're finally like, oh, I was just about to hop off board. And like, yeah, you guys are going to watch it because you're huge Lord of the Rings fans. Most of the Lord of the Rings fans are going to watch it. For more casual viewers, they've hopped off episode 2 or 3. Like, most of them hopped off season 1. Like, season 1, as far as I was aware, was a failed season. Like that season did not do well. This season's doing worse than that one is. And the best thing that they can do moving forward, to Tim's point, we need to start trimming some fat. We need to start killing some of these storylines that are going on. It probably won't happen this season, more than likely. I'm assuming that this season is going to hopefully start tying in a lot of these storylines, so we don't have to do so much like jumping back and forth. And you have 3 main storylines you need to touch on at all times. Galadriel, as much as I don't care for her storyline, she is the main character. You have to touch on her. You have Sauron, and I would argue the dwarves probably are like your top 3 storylines you always need to have as like anchor points for every episode. And if you want to sprinkle in a couple of different storylines along with that, you'll probably be fine. But this constant first half of the season is just so boring and bad and nothing's going on. But then we'll start in the second half of the season, it'll be good. Like, there's already the rumor starting the show is going to get canceled, and unless they start cutting this fat off like now, like this episode felt like we're already in like going into the end of season 3 right now. It feels like we're starting to kick things up now, and like, well, what are we gonna do for the next like? And again, I don't know what they could go to. I know where we're going, but I don't know like what all these in between parts are. You guys are the lore experts, but as a casual viewer, I'm just. Yes, I know where this is ending eventually. I'm assuming. I would assume that it's my. If I had to guess, as a casual fan, it would be cool to see the whole show end leading into I don't remember what the battle is called, but the battle that opens up in Fellowship of the Rings.
Yes,
that's where I'm assuming
the
this is
alliance of men and elves.
There we go.
I'm assuming that's where we're headed to.
Which I think would be a cool ending. I would like to see that. But I don't know if we're going to get there, and I don't know what we're going to fill in for the rest of these seasons, considering everything that was shown in this episode. My worry is this is going to be a pattern for the rest of the seasons, which will eventually kill the show. I don't think Amazon necessarily would cancel it, but if this is just going to... Like, I don't know.
Amazon being Amazon, they don't necessarily need this show to turn a profit.
Right.
Just because, like, Amazon is a little different from any other streaming service / content creation platform in that their shows are essentially a loss leader. Like, you don't need your shows to make money because you're making money on every other thing that you have your hands in as Amazon. Yeah, so they spent the money to get the rights. They are spending the money to create the content and everything. But I feel like you got to try really, really hard to get a show canceled at Amazon, because Amazon is not relying on their shows to make money. They're relying on every other aspect of their business to make money.
Well, so trust me, the people of Rings of Power have been trying, it seems, at least.
Well, what you said, I have seen the rumors flying around that like season 3 hasn't been greenlit yet. But I'm like, they greenlit 5 seasons, from what I understand.
Yeah, I'm assuming season 3 will happen. I that's what my assumption is, and that's their chance to at least greenlight the rest of the seasons that they have. But it's on its last legs, I would argue.
I've also got, like you said, the impression that they are moving really fast all of a sudden.
Yes. Like things we feel like we're already like heading into like the final final moments of the show. It's like, whoa, hold on.
We've got some ways. We've got some. I know.
I understand we have some ways to go. I'm just saying, from what was shown in this episode, it doesn't feel like we're in season 2. Like, again, there was that time lapse, and I just don't want that to start being a crutch for them, because the first half of a season was so bad that we just make these weird jumps into a second half of the season. It's like, oh well. should I just start missing the first 5 episodes of every season to then just jump to the second half? Because like what did we learn from the first half of this season that we couldn't just take going into the second season from the end of season 1? Was there anything specific we could really take outside of, I think, Numenor's storyline?
Put me on a spot there. I mean,
yeah, I'd have to think about that.
That's what we were saying about the writing on the show. But you brought up, you said the core 3, and this is why I argue that we've still got a ways to go, and I'm glad to see them ramping it up. You brought up that the core 3 were the elves, the dwarves, and Celebrimbor and Anatar. That final battle, as Caleb mentioned, was the last alliance of men and elves.
Right.
And to this point, even in this episode, we have Pharazôn standing on top of Numenor, kind of talking crap about the elves.
Right.
So we have a ways to go to heal the relationship between men and elves to reach that final alliance.
Yeah, and you're right. You're right about that. That the main storylines do have some. We still have some ways to go for the main. It's the extra storylines that I'm just like,
oh right,
God, we're about to get so many filler episodes with those stories.
And that's the problem. They're spreading themselves too thin by having 5 or 6 different storylines all going on at the same time, and it really takes away from their ability to flesh it, because they're trying to cover like 2,000 years of history in 5 8-episode seasons. Like you have 40 episodes to tell this story, and it's like 2,000 years of history. So why are we spending time on Harfoot's running through the desert of Rune?
Right, exactly.
There are so many other things that we could be fleshing out instead of telling the story of how the Shire was founded.
I wonder how many people are like, how much feedback they're getting right now about like, you know what? We don't need Harfoots. Let's cut them. Like
kill it.
We don't need to kill the Harfoots. I about to kill the Harfoots, but kill that storyline.
Bury them.
Like, let's wrap it up. I don't need Gandalf in the Second Age meeting Harfoots prior to when I see him in The Hobbit. I don't need it. I don't care. Right now, the other core storylines are far more interesting. So we beat a dead horse on the Harfoots. No one cares for the Harfoots. I haven't seen anyone who's like, you know what, my favorite storyline is Poppy and Normie. Haven't seen it. I really can't wait for that scene where we got who was the steward we met? The guy with the hair and the ears stealing the water.
I try to forget him and his terrible prosthetics every day.
He's nobody.
He's nobody.
That's right.
I really can't wait. In the season trailer, it showed him and Poppy about to kiss. I really can't wait for that. That's the storyline that I'm showing up for every Thursday, is the made up characters in a relationship.
I turn it on every week, just hoping for that scene, just dangling it right in front of me.
That man walked into the dressing room on his first day. It's like, so what costume you got for me? It's like, we got $10. Can we make it work?
I got hairspray and a blow dryer. Why
don't you just grow your hair out and help us out with that one? We'll just use some hairspray.
Got this can of hairspray in a burlap sack.
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah, this will have to do. Sorry.
I'm all right. So we'll wrap this up. I'm not looking forward to revisiting the Harfoots. I'm not looking forward. Genuinely, I think it's Gandalf, and I'm not looking forward to finding out that it's
we
Gandalf.
all do. We all think it's Gandalf, and we're all going to be so bummed when it is.
And I'm going to wish they had ended it sooner.
You know, the super funny thing about that theory is every single person I've talked to who's like a huge Lord of the Rings geek, every single one of them is telling me how much they hate they will hate that reveal if it is Gandalf. And I'm just sitting over here like, I mean, I think it's tacky and definitely cringe, but you guys are going to hate it way more than I am when it happens. For sure. That's going to make me laugh.
Well, I think the key thing here, like you said, Lord of the Rings fans, is like, we know, Caleb and I know of the existence of the other two wizards. That they are, there's tons of evidence to state that these two wizards are the Blue Wizards.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And to go against all of that setup and tell us that it's Gandalf is nothing more than pandering.
Oh, I hope it's true. I really hope it's true just to see your reactions to it.
Bryce is just so here for the big reveal that will set the world on fire.
I just want to see it.
At this point, well, now I'm more invested as we're talking about it, because unless they reveal next episode what this guy's name is, which, God, I hope they do, because I'm sick of tuning in. He's looking for a Gand. He's a grand elf. I'm sick of tuning in for all of this.
Oh, I just want to see Poppy just turn around like, what should we call you? He just slow turns around. Gandalf. Credits. Dun dun. I just want to see it happen.
If it's not, it might be the most talked about part of that episode.
Oh, it will be.
100%. It's going to blow up.
Yes.
It will be amazing.
I need it.
If they are smart, it would blow up like, oh, it's Gandalf. I don't think it would blow up huge, but if it turns out that it's one of the Blue Wizards, you're going to have Lord of the Rings fans going like, yes, thank you. You got one thing right. You got
finally.
About time.
All right. I think that's all I have to say. This has been a lot of fun, though. But
yeah, it's good.
This was, so far, I'll end it with, honestly, this might be my favorite episode of the show so far. Of the show.
This is definitely my favorite episode of season 2. This is... yeah, it might be my favorite episode of the show as well.
I don't need the big battles. I don't need the fights. That's not really what Tolkien was about. I mean, he wrote some of the fights. He was like, and they fought. That was it. It wasn't about the action. This is about the drama and the storyline. And this episode moved it forward. And I'm willing to look past some of the sloppy-ish writing because it moved the story. It still got the story to advance in a way that I was invested in. So this is where, there might have been some cool battle scenes in season 1, some cool stuff. I would have to go back and rewatch season 1, but yeah, like I said, I think this might be my favorite episode of the show so far. It's definitely better because episode 4 was my least favorite episode of the show. Episode 4 that was rock bottom. I didn't know if we would recover. And we did. So
they followed up a real weak one with a real strong one.
That episode, you cannot convince me until the end of the maybe till the end of the series, that 4 was not just filler. Which is a shame because they should have been fleshing out the 3 storylines we saw in this one.
Right.
That's all I have for this.
Ditto.
Book it.
Book it.
Feel
all
good.
Right? And then
now in 2 days we get to watch another one.
I'm excited. And
yeah, give us episode 6. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm ready. I cannot wait. So we will see you whenever we're able to get this recorded and posted.
Before we jump into the next category, I want to tell you a little bit about Zencastr. When I was preparing for our 13 Nights of Halloween series, I was really searching for a way to streamline the process. I wanted a professional-looking setup to invite our guests to. I wanted quality audio and video recording, and I wanted the easiest way to release the episodes to as broad of an audience as possible. This is how I landed on Zencastr. It is now super easy to record a podcast with Zencastr. Just log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen, knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. And speaking of audio quality, have you ever worried what you sound like? Zencastr's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recording. It removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. Set the podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with the click of a button. So if you are thinking of starting your own podcast or just want to streamline what you are already doing, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code AVERAGECUSTOMER, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. That's average customer, one word. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all of my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
And now we return you to our regular scheduled program in progress.